Hard to do.
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mr. Hoff?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Dance?
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom?
Here.
Ms. Goodman?
Oh, here we go. There's Barry.
Lou?
Oh, sorry, I'm late.
Mr. Gentili?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Okay, we'll start with approval of the agenda. Does everybody have a chance to look it over? Thank you. If there's any changes, comments?
I have a request.
Okay.
As I shared with you over the weekend, Doug, we have a legal opinion from our attorney relating to some issues with our contract for pavement with Reith Riley. The terms of the Open Meetings Act say that we could go into closed session to review that legal opinion, or we could have that conversation in open meeting.
I would suggest we go into closed session.
I would recommend that we add that to the agenda, and if we get to that point and we decide we don't need the closed session, we can forgo that, but.
You're gonna put that under the new business
Put it under
A or new business C, closed session? We've already got a MDOT contract, we've got that subject under new business.
How about new business? See,
Just put, okay. New business C, closed session.
is our attorney gonna be here too, or is he not necessary? or-
I don't think he was not planning on being here.
All right, so with that change, do we have any other comments, or can we get the motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented,
As amended.
As
or
amended?
amended.
I'll support that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Public comment? Do you shift to public next week when you're here, next month?
I would be public then.
I noticed that the paper isn't coming to the meetings recently, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but, usually they cover it too, but
They've had somebody new there, so I don't know.
they know.
Because they didn't come to the board meeting that one month, because they didn't assign anybody, and then there is somebody new. I think they're shifting people around, so I don't know.
So there may be somebody coming. so-
Well, I think the last
Actually,
time somebody came in from the paper was 3 months ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was a new fella, a new person.
From what I know with the newspaper, I would not expect them to be coming in the future. I just don't think they have the resources anymore to
Really?
attend all
Yeah.
meetings they would like to. But
All right, item 5, approval of the minutes, previous meeting. We had a chance to review those, and if so, comments or corrections? And if none, entertain a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll second it.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Treasurer's report. Accounts payable portion for July.
Is this something that the feds will pick up on the lightning strike repairs? Is that, or do we have to assume that, or what?
we've already been reimbursed by our insurance company,
Okay,
minus our deductible on that. Those are, the
There-
submittal for the insurance company was based on all the quotes we had, and now we're finally getting the bills for a couple of the items.
okay. So they're picking up the whole amount, or what percentage are they picking up?
Our deductible's $1,000, I think, so all but $1,000.
What was the total amount, you roughly, do you know?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't remember what that check, I'll say north of 10,000 though.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Gary, does that finish it up with the repairs for the lightning strike and stuff? Because I know the last time you were waiting for the
It's
electrical.
really close, there might be one or two
Okay.
little things, but all the big stuff is done.
I know the last couple times you were waiting for the electrician to get scheduled and to do all
Right.
this stuff.
else stand out to you, Barry, that everything looks pretty normal this month?
I don't have anything, no.
Okay. No other questions? Do we have a motion to approve the accounts payable for July?
I'll make a motion to approve the accounts payable as presented for July 2019.
Support.
Roll call.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman. Mr. Dunn,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Fosh,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Yes.
Moving on to the revenues and expenses.
I did have a question, it's kind of here, the right side design, when will we be getting an update on the marketing plan?
We typically schedule that in October, beginning of the fiscal year,
Okay.
but it's really whenever the board would desire, we can schedule it. But that would be when I would be planning for it, unless the board wanted otherwise.
Okay, thanks.
So the revenues and expenses, balance sheet.
The state's a little behind, I guess, huh?
I guess, which line are you referring to?
State reimbursements. Minus 276%.
Well, actually ahead. If
Okay.
you look at the budgeted amount, it's 15,000, and year-to-date, we've already received 59,000. So we're actually ahead on that revenue item. That balance is what would be remaining in the budget, so,
The 43,626?
but because it's negative, we are over revenue on that budget item.
Okay, okay. Auto rental fees, that's not a hot item right now, it looks like, huh?
Maori Leasing pays us intermittently. If it's good, it's every 6 months, sometimes it can stretch beyond that. And I think probably the last payment we had was probably December-ish,
Yeah.
so.
Is, earlier in the year, I've lost my train of thought here. Earlier in the year, who's our contract with? Jim? They would fall behind, but we're staying current, he's staying current with his payments to us now?
They are lagging on the PFC payments, but their regular contract payments they've been good on.
Okay. Public charge.
Have you let them know about, or asked them about that?
I haven't, but I probably should. Well, Susan and I can.
Right. Because I don't think, those used to get sent here and then I would forward them on, but I don't think recently they've been going directly to the county, so
Mm.
I'm less aware as to when they're coming in.
Right.
So if you need me to follow up, just let me know.
Do we send a bill like monthly, or how do we do?
That's based on our passenger enplanements, so it's not something we can bill for because we don't know those numbers. So we really just rely on them to be submitting them to us. They're supposed to do it monthly, and usually they have been, but
Not yet. This fiscal year, they have not been
behind.
as good.
That's the accounts receivable line, public charge.
No.
That would be passenger facility charges, that line. So you see the anticipated for the year was budgeted 25,000, so far we've received 8,000. Now, a significant portion of that gets accrued in the summer because we have 4 times as many passengers in July and August versus other months.
Okay.
So But that is what we're talking about being behind.
Okay.
Is there anything that requires them to submit that monthly? Or do they have some leeway?
I think legally it is within 30 days.
Any other questions on the revenues, expenses, or the balance sheet? Or comments by Rachel, last meeting? Any thoughts?
Well, Susan and I work together on these financial reports. I certainly am not disappearing. I won't be here monthly anymore, but Susan certainly can, come to me with any questions, or Barry. I'm still at the county. It's not like I've moved very far, so. But it's been a pleasure to work with the board and with Barry. I will miss this. This has been something that I enjoy, so I will miss it, but I'm not too far away.
Thank you. Well,
I guess I just have a question, is just procedurally, and not even something I've even thought of, and, really happened, I should have asked this question when we transitioned from Russ to you, is I know the funds for like the federal grants, don't they come into accounts that the treasurer oversees? At least the people working on it were always in Russ's office. Does that all make sense the way that is structured?
Yes.
Okay.
do we have a motion to accept the revenue and expenses in the balance sheet?
So moved.
Oh, second.
And that is a, all in favor?
No, yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Delinquent hangar tenant. Barry, did you say you printed off that? No. Or should the board act on, well, I was trying to figure out where to slide that in.
I think it makes sense now.
So, yeah, so Rachel's provided her letter of official resignation, and we need a motion to accept Susan or to nominate Susan for the position of Airport Authority Treasurer.
I'll nominate Susan to be airport treasurer.
First, we probably ought to accept the letter of Rachel stepping down.
Yeah, I thought.
So I'll make that motion to accept with great regrets and gratitude to Miss Rachel Nelson, our new county treasurer.
I'll support that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And then the follow-up nomination.
I'll make that motion.
Susan, the proper spelling of your last name.
It's Zelinski, so it's Zielinski.
I never assume anything not being from this town. Okay, thank you. Do we have a support for that motion?
I will support it.
And all in favor?
I
think that should be a
Roll
roll
call.
call. Roll
Oh,
call.
yeah, roll call.
That's right. you just rolled.
Was that Mr. Ha that seconded?
Yes. Sure did.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Ha?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Ms. Goodman?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Welcome aboard. Do you have any comments or questions for any of us?
Not for this meeting, but anyway,
I will be.
for the next one.
Great. Now, moving on to our delinquent hangar tenant. I think Barry has a letter that he printed off that was sent. For George. We really need one more. Go ahead.
Oh, there's
We
another
got
one.
enough.
Well,
There we go.
You know,
Right, I'm just not.
I think
Oh, you
we
got
got-
another?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that everybody? Yep. All right, so, the letter was mailed, accepted, the offer would require a payment if if Mr. Kaiser accepted our offer of $5,340 by the end of this week. He passed on the ability to save a little bit more money. An update, I spoke to him via phone today en route to this meeting, and he said he will have a check to us by the end of the week. So he is was accepting it. I reminded him, you know, it's the end of this week, and he said he would certainly have our payment taken care of. So, and at that point, it mentioned in here that we would start a new contract with him on the rental and staying current. So, good news. And
So he's gonna write out a check for 5340 now, is that what you're saying?
that's what he told me on the phone.
Okay, and then there's still outstanding about $5,000 then, is that right?
And
No.
we will,
We wait to slate
Wait,
clean up.
so-
Clean, right.
so this follows the same direction we went with one other delinquent tenant from a year or so ago.
Yeah, yeah,
So the offer was consistent to get that cleaned up.
that's a pretty sweet deal.
So, that money was not budgeted anywhere, so it's helpful
If it comes.
if it comes. Yep, it's only Monday.
This is the guy with the old plane, right?
Yeah.
But going forward, we won't continue to do this type of stuff, would we? I mean, has this board kind of said, no more making deals? Like,
Well,
Look, everybody's
Or-
part of the issue is that our lease is actually with his deceased father. So that's
In
the
this case,
condition
I
of
understand
getting things up to date.
Yeah.
Now we can actually enforce current terms of release on this individual as opposed to dealing with an
I mean,
estate and other
anybody's,
things.
like,
But yes,
no
yes.
matter what, we're not gonna cut a
Right,
deal.
so going back several years, when Rachel implemented a much more efficient billing cycle, and everybody has been very current, these two, because the previous situation was, no bills are going out.
Mhm.
No phone calls are being
Right.
made, and so these were the last two, or the second of the two that were, way behind.
Okay, all right, so now people get their bills and the expectation of payment, okay.
Any other questions on that?
Thank you for your diligence on that.
Committee reports and discussions. The executive committee did not meet this between last meeting and this, but we will, I will be getting the guys together because we have some discussions to have as far as Barry's contracts. I'll jump back, speaking for that committee, if I jump back to the agenda that was sent out, or there was a copy of Barry's, or the minutes, there was a copy of the contract with.
It was actually part of the agenda.
I'm in August, okay. It's part of the agenda. So this is the contract that we approved to bring, remember this year we brought Barry current with 3 different contracts. The fixed base operator agreement is the one that, the language in this document,
Page A4.
A4, has a section that Dave, who is the new county administrator, had questioned. He had questioned this portion of the contract because if you remember back to last month's meeting, we had Jeff and Mark go to the county with the potential necessity of a quick loan to take care of our fuel farm that's got repair issues. Out of that request came a question to Barry about why the county is paying for that when he, it says he's supposed to maintain it. So I've had a conversation with George Saylor. George is gonna look at how a few other contracts are worded, fixed base operator contracts, and we're going to reword this because he said this, Barry's comment today, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of this language predates when Barry was here. It was already in there with Bill House. It's never been an intention that this contract would hold Barry responsible for fixing the equipment owned by the airport. The fact that it says does the maintenance is the questionable part. I think it's reasonable to understand that Barry would have daily operations of that equipment, but that he wouldn't, Orchard Beach Aviation doesn't own it and wouldn't be responsible for the overall maintenance of it in case of the situation we're in now. So it's clarifying the language before we sign a new contract with Barry going forward, because if you recall, we got Barry current to the end of this September, correct?
Right.
So as of October 1, we need a new contract signed, and Barry is a terrible personal negotiator. And because the budget is in such a tight position as it is, he is fine keeping all the language in these contracts the same from a financial aspect, but would like this clarified so that it's clear going forward who's responsible for what.
Well, as I told you in our previous meeting, the question and the analogy I used with Dave was that window, if it's washing it, that's maintenance. If there's a stone that went through it and needs to be replaced, that's not maintenance, that's, I look at that in a different light. That's me. Dave does not see it in that light, and that's, that's fine, we can agree to disagree, but that's kind of where, I know that's where he's at, but again, it's, any thoughts, concept?
Well, I understand where Dave is coming from. It's parts and labor and that, replacements, that's different than maintenance. But it's defining maintenance, and that, I think it is important to get that defined so that we can be clear moving forward on what that is.
Can we have George just clear up that paragraph?
He's working on that now.
He's working on it?
Yeah, I spoke to him, I sent him emails on it, we had a discussion on the way up here today, and he understands, and he understands how it can be confusing. He's gonna reread this, look at the rest of the, compare it to some other FBO contracts that he's gonna put his hands on, and come back with a recommendation.
I don't think that anything's going backwards. I mean, we approved that at our last meeting, didn't we?
Well, we approved a way to address it, if this board wants to approve that process. We did not approve an allocation,
Right.
but we approved a way to get it done.
And I do have an update on the current status of that in my report.
Anything more, Barry, is that sufficient for any other questions on that?
So we will hold
So
this
the
up until
so the
we get that
executive
cleared?
committee is gonna present, so I'll get the executive committee together as soon as I've got some language from George to approve and come back. Sound all right?
There is no intent to enforce this with Barry being responsible, correct?
Not on.
Not for this unless this board wanted to exercise that.
Well, there's basic maintenance, that's right, isn't it? Who's doing
Oh,
the
this
basic
is,
maintenance?
this is above and beyond because the existing system out there is no longer repairable, you might say, economically repairable.
Mhm.
So it's time to upgrade,
Okay.
definitely, versus throwing more money into the old system. Because we have thrown money into the old system several times over the last 5 or 6 months,
Mhm.
and now it's just went kaput. So Barry has got a quote to replace it because of the age of the old one and the cost of trying to maintain it and bring it up to speed.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the airport authority's responsibility. Yeah, and do we have a grant we can get from the state or anything?
No,
No.
we've acted on this,
Right.
Mark. At the last
That's
meeting,
right.
we gave a path forward
Yeah,
if
we can
the
5 grand.
authority wants to
It's
exercise
10
it.
grand.
10 grand, yeah.
I didn't receive them on this, but was the path forward?
Oh, God. It was a line item to be applied for the revenue coming in from this, because it's been going strictly to the general fund. So in the future, when something arises, there is a pot of money there.
Kind of like a capital reserve.
Well, I don't know even if I'd call it the capital reserve, I'd say as opposed to it going to general fund dollars, it goes to a specific line item for that specific area. And then the revenue coming from that would be able to pay back the $10,000.
I can elaborate a little bit since part of the research I did in responding to David's questions was I went back to contracts I had that actually go back to the late 90s. And in the late 90s, there was a 1 cent a gallon fee that flowed to the airport for fuel sales. When and at that time, all the equipment was actually owned by Rainbow Brothers, third party that was responsible. When this fuel system, specifically the new tanks were put in 99, I believe, at that time, the airport took over owning the equipment. Well, actually, it took over owning the tanks as far as I can tell, Orchard Beach at that time owned the pumps and the equipment. The airport borrowed from the county $100,000 to pay for that equipment, and at that point raised that charge from 1 cent a gallon to 15 cents a gallon. And over a period of about 10 years, the airport paid off that debt to the county. Since that's been paid off, or roughly 2009, 2010, that 15 cents a gallon is still being collected, but has been going into the general fund. And essentially what Jeff is saying is we should maybe be setting aside some of that money for future capital expenses. Sometime between 99 and 2008, when I took over, Orchard Beach basically transferred the equipment to the airport authority. The language in one of those contracts says the value was $20,000 for the airport authority to basically own going forward. So those are some of the pieces. I don't have I wish I had every contract in that series. I've got a few. I don't know, did you ever get a chance to look in the piles of
Yes.
Tom's stuff to see if you could find some of those missing ones? But that's some of the history that I have that mostly predates me.
Does George have all this information too then? Or not? Are you looking at George to put this paragraph in or not then?
Yes,
Okay.
George is gonna make a recommendation, the executive committee will meet, review it, come to this board with the final recommendation.
Okay, all right, so he'll have all the information you've got, yeah.
Where's the $10,000 coming from right now to purchase? I get what you're saying about having it be paid back.
It's available upon action of this board after review of the contract and allocation of a line item.
And I think
Those
Barry's
were,
got-
that was the catch.
I'll give an update on certain things. I think that the criticality is maybe a little bit less based
Than
on
what
things that
was.
have happened between last meeting and this meeting, so I'll give an update.
He
at
does
that
a
point.
Microsoft reset on it at work for a week.
Well, basically, it's a reimbursement.
Control fleet, huh?
Turn off, turn on.
So what we gotta do is have the executive committee meet, agree on a direction, then there's money available depending on the direction we choose to go.
Correct.
Okay,
Which is a loan.
yeah, right, and to upgrade the equipment,
We do have a carrot, but
Okay.
we'll get into that in the future.
okay.
Executive committee this Thursday in Grand Haven, you made it?
Grand Haven, right on board.
What's in it?
What else are they doing in Grand Haven? Do they have a boat ride, a dinner cruise and so on?
We can
Is that on the
coordinate
agenda? We can do it on a dinner
We're looking at
cruise.
me, I must be on that committee.
Yeah, there you go.
This is embarrassing, but the budget committee, we did meet, I did not make copies of the budget.
It's in the packet,
It's in the packet.
it's appendix B.
Maybe I didn't print it because I got a copy. Thank you for saving me. So, the budget committee did meet, and our arms were twisted hard by Susan and Rachel, to say, like it or leave it, here it is. That's my finger for the day. But, we had, met and discussed the budget previous, we met again, and really, in order to create a balanced budget, we didn't have a whole lot of options. So what you see in front of you is accurate with the three main areas that were reduced, where our advertising budget was reduced by $10,000 from what we proposed and pretty much what we've spent the last several years. We reduced the PFC expenses for $20,000, correct, Barry?
No, it's more like, yeah, it's
11.
more than 10, but
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, so that was reduced, and then, what was our third item?
The transfer in to the general fund,
contribution from the county.
The contribution from the county. So we had requested, after our previous budget meeting, an increase of $10,000 to the county contribution. That was what was put forward. That was reduced to a $5,000 contribution, which is still an increase over past years. So we're appreciative of that. We're still working on research to provide what the other airports, similar in size and requirements are doing, so that we can have a better story to tell. Because I think many on this board feel like we're still being, underfunded for the requirements that are put on us by the federal government and with the airline service. So you've got a balanced budget in front of you that the committee met, discussed, and is recommending that we adopt.
And if I could just add one thing as it relates to the marketing budget. We have been spending for the last number of years $40,000 annually. That $40,000 comes from $10,000 in state grants, $10,000 from the airline, and $20,000 has been contributed out of the general fund. This reduction basically reduces the general fund contribution from $20,000 to $10,000, cutting it in half. The overall impact to the marketing budget is going from $40,000 to $30,000.
One item to note here, your 18-19 activity through 7/31, hangar rent, about the sixth line down, is $18,000. So that does not, we budgeted 19, we're sitting at 18, with a few months to go. We budgeted the same, but we've got a delinquent tenant that's gonna pay us $5,000, so, that wasn't factored in, that collection was not factored into last year's budget. So, it'll reflect it, and going forward, staying at the same number is probably appropriate. If he pays current, we should be over budget. So, any other questions? A lot of information. Any other comments by the committee members?
You need a motion to
If not,
accept the budget as
I would-
presented for
I would do it as a
recommendation?
tentative budget.
Tentative.
And that way you have some leeway. If anything does change with the county's contribution, you can then adopt a final after the county adopts their tentative.
So your comment means they're gonna change by going up versus down, right?
Well, you can hope that.
Well, I wouldn't
don't
hold
think
your
it'll go
breath,
up.
but-
Jeez, almighty.
We got a 5 upper.
Yeah, that's better than nothing, but a tenner would have looked better.
Well, the budget's not set yet, but at
Okay.
any rate.
Call it a tentative then. So when do we have to make it final? If it's tentative next month,
It's
okay.
gotta be in place in September.
Okay. In September, right?
What is the
Starts-
county's anticipated adoption of the county budget?
Well,
What's the
tentative would be
date?
this month's board meeting, final would be next month's board,
Okay.
which would be after our
meeting, correct, so, but,
But we'll have that set.
You'll
We've
know,
got a couple of scheduled meetings that will be
right.
for anybody who wants to come and plead their case. So there is time. At any rate, I'll make that motion for adopt a tentative budget
And I'll second
as
that.
presented.
Should that be a roll call?
Mr. Dons,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hawes,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Abstain because I haven't seen it.
Oh, was it in your
and
packet?
Mr.
I didn't get
Bergstrom.
one.
Oh, okay.
Capital Projects Committee did not meet. Don't have a lot of money to play with, so, but I will give you an update. As part of the Budget Committee session, I informed them that I have researched pricing on the remaining 9 doors on the T-hanger and on the installation of those doors, which is kind of 2 parts. The third part of that project would be to paint the building. We had discussed a few meetings ago the possibility that if we put all the numbers together and find out what that number is, of going to the county and requesting a loan to be paid back over a period of time at a certain dollar amount, such that we could complete that T-hanger project all at once, get it done, save funds from piecemealing it over 3 years. So again, I've chased down numbers on 2 of the 3 things. As soon as that third one is in, I'll get the capital projects committee together to discuss it and bring a recommendation to the board.
And that's based on projections for rentals of those.
That'll all be part of that, and then we can decide if that's the direction we want to go or not. Based on the budget, we just approved tentative, and the situation, we don't have the funds to do a project like that. Because it's got to be done out of our funds, not federal funds. So we'll just have to balance whether we want to take that loan out.
We did also consider obtaining a loan from the county too, as a possibility.
Yeah. So that's what,
Doug, did this, Mr. Shively ever get back to you, or, I know he didn't get back to anybody that I know of.
I have
Oh, you do have
some
something,
stuff
okay,
for
Okay.
discussion later. Yep.
okay.
so as far as the committee's reports, that's what we've got. And I would turn it over to Barry for his director's report.
Okay, so, well, I should hand that out. I'm not the only one. So we got more people here. I printed out the same number, but I seem to be one short. Okay, so no airport incidents to report. Last month in here I had summer is here. This month I'm saying summer ended this morning. It's a noticeable drop off as of this weekend. We had sold out flights Thursday, Friday, yesterday, this morning, and nothing going forward. Last week was probably our busiest week of the year for general aviation. The number of jets we had, a lot of activity going on, and today we've had nothing. Just a very noticeable drop off. This is not unusual. In fact, I think usually it probably happens about a week earlier, so I think we got an extra week of summer this year for some reason. But it's noticeable how quickly summer ends here, how short our actual busy season really is. Pigeon removal, I told you that our trap was actually very successful. We really, I think, eliminated all the pigeons we had. But then this morning we noticed 4 of them are just sitting on one of the hangars, so we're getting it back out and trying to stay on top of this before they decide that this is a lovely place to nest and continue to cause issues.
I'm kind of curious about the
Migration.
trap. What is it? Is it trap, is it like something that they're going to eat and
Yeah,
it closes?
it's like got 3 chambers, and you can come in from the ends. You basically put food and stuff in the middle, and then they just kind of work their way in and get trapped. And for whatever reason, apparently trapped pigeons who are then screaming or
Notify the other.
are notify the other ones, and they all come running. Oh, I need to come
So what's
and
going on?
yeah. So
Rouse
you
them
would
in.
think you run away, but no, they do the opposite. So yeah, so the gentleman from USDA Wildlife Services, suggested you should actually try to capture one and put him in the center, because that will actually draw the other ones in. So that's easier said than done, but.
What happens with them then?
Huh?
What happens to them when they're trapped?
Barbecue.
It's a special casino.
No barbecuing is involved, but other lethal means are employed.
Okay,
Um,
I was glad it's working. It's good.
So the last item here, I just wanted the board to be aware, I was actually possibly anticipating maybe a letter to the board as a result of a complaint that happened last week. But I wanted the board to be aware of the situation. So we had a jet airplane here that basically had significant oil leak on one of its engines. And it was basically grounded here for over 2 weeks as the company brought in various maintenance people. Ultimately, maintenance people from GE came, as they're actually the engine manufacturer. And as part of that process to fix it, they went through different things to try to identify where the leak was coming from. And middle of last week, actually no, it wasn't middle of last week, it was a weekend, so like 8 days ago, Sunday, late in the day, they needed to basically do a stress test on the engine. So the winds that day were out of the east, so they towed the aircraft on the taxiway down towards the other end of the field, pointed basically into the wind, so the wind was basically blowing right down the runway. And one of the neighbors, so basically they brought the aircraft up to 45% power for about a half hour. One of the neighbors called and complained, didn't like the explanation he was given, called back, still didn't like the explanation he was given, then showed up on site. Various different opinions as to what transpired at that point. Then, unfortunately, some employees here potentially used language that he then found offensive. He came back then Monday, let me know that he felt he was owed apologies. So that's all what happened. We needed to do kind of a similar exercise. Basically, the mechanics found, over by the bluffs and kind of towards the marsh and the river was a better location. It partly depends on the direction of the wind as to how you want to do this. So just want to let the board know that that occurred. I don't know if there will be any follow-up. I didn't actually get the gentleman's name, so I don't know which neighbor he is. But if we do find that out, I have asked my employee to write an apology letter to him because I think it is appropriate. Although I think there are two sides to that story. So wanted to let the board know about that. Moving on then to airfares. So the current airfare situation, is similar to what we've been seeing. We are still the most expensive airport in the region to fly out of. Traverse City is, still doing well. News out of Traverse City is they're continuing to grow at a phenomenal pace. I mean, Allegiant flights now to Arizona. I mean, they're really doing well, and I commend them for what they've been able to do. It's not a surprise to me, nor their manager, that the biggest issue they had was that prices were artificially high, and that was depressing demand. They've been able to convince the airlines to try a different model, and it's, I think, working very well. Saying that, they're still more expensive than Grand Rapids or Muskegon, but still, where they historically have been, it's made a big difference, and I think it's uncapping a lot of demand. Now, that's good for the region. We just have to figure out how to react and adjust our strategies to it.
It's kind of interesting, it pops around here, we're low on going to Phoenix,
Yep, it all depends on what fares, specials, are a particular airline is happening. If you look at Muskegon, last month, they were within $1 of Grand Rapids because United was at a very significant airfare sale. This month, their average fare is bumped up $76, so they're now, that far away from Grand Rapids. So any given month, on any given route, the best deal can be any airport. But these are averages that kind of give you a picture of where we stand competitively over time. So, one thing I will add is that our fare this month, because we're getting out of peak season, some of our low fares, our 129 fares, are starting to pop up again because they're available at the end of September. In August, all of those fares have been sold out. So the lowest fare from here to Chicago was $209 last month, so it was $80 more. So one would expect that our fares should have dropped $80 because that component dropped $80. But if you look, the drop was only $1, so that means the average fare on Southwest out of Chicago increased this month by $79. So, you know, it all depends on where things stand. Any questions on the airfares? Employments. So, for the month of July, we had a total of 1,353 total passengers. That is a decrease from a year ago of 24%, which mirrors our decrease in June. Again, what is going on in Traverse City is the primary cause of that. There just isn't the same level of demand. But on the performance side, the airline doing very well. So there were a total of 6 flights. 1 was canceled and 5 were actually delayed for the month, which results in those percentages. Of those 6, 5 of them were weather-related issues, and the other one was basically the airline needed to wait for fuel in Chicago. So from an operations standpoint in July, airline's been doing very good, which we need to offset some of many of the other negatives that we have with our service. Any questions on enplanements or performance?
Barry,
Yes.
does the budget for the next fiscal year take into account these recent trends?
I know we did lower the PFC number, I think, about 20%. So, yes, it does. So, fuel system monitor update. So, part of my discussion and explanation last month is I said that there are 2 companies that we work with in the state that handle installing, maintaining this type of equipment at airports. One of them is Northern Pump, based out of Grayling, and the other is Sparling Corporation, and I forget where they're based, but they're south of Detroit. Neither of which is, in our neck of the woods, per se. In the past, when we've had projects done and put it out to bids to both of those, Northern Pump has always been significantly less expensive than Sparling. I think part of that is just because a couple hours less travel time getting here. So I've been working with Northern Pump for a lot of our issues. And the quote I presented to the board last month was from Northern Pump. But for historic reasons, Sparling, who actually installed the tanks 20 years ago, is the one that we've historically used to do annual filter changes, calibration of equipment, etc. And that traditionally happens in June. For some reason, this year that did not happen until the end of July. So they were up here anyway. So I asked them to look at the system, since they don't have to incur a $800 travel and fee to bring them up here to look at it. And they were able to reprogram the system. Basically, when the system is failing, it just basically goes out, the memory's wiped, and kind of gets reset to kind of an unprogrammed state. Northern Pump had done a reset like this when they were out here probably end of June, maybe it was early July. And when they did it, it operated normally for about 7 days and then went out again, and that's happened just before the last board meeting. So on the 29th, Sparling was here, they reprogrammed it, and it worked for, again, 7 days, and then went out. I called them and got them to agree to work with me over the phone and basically teach me how to reprogram it. So I now, I'm not sure I'm officially qualified, but I can go through and get back to working if and when this happens again. This kind of walkthrough on the phone happened last Tuesday, so we're now at 6 days. So we'll see if we can get beyond 7. It takes about an hour to walk through reprogramming it. So that kind of gives us some breathing room as far as the urgency of this. We can now really be monitoring and, for the most part, be complying with EPA and EGLE requirements as it relates to managing an underground fuel system. However, and this is something that I've known about for a while now, on the jet tank, there are some issues with the fuel probe, and it's not always reading correctly, which seems to be preventing us from getting a valid leak detection report, which is a requirement that we have one of those on file every quarter. Basically, it missed the last quarter, and so there is still an issue, but from most of our operations, we can continue limping along with things as they are until the board decides how we want to address this.
Is
You
this
want to
old
address
equipment or old technology?
It's 20 years old.
20 years old, so it's
Yeah.
about time to
Yes, yes.
replace it.
The
Reproduce it.
Yeah,
fuel
there we go.
probe, there are a fuel probe in each tank. We've already this year replaced the other one, and that was probably about a $2,000 to $3,000 expense. So that kind of, if we were to just repair, that would be the expense. The resetting the system, I can't say it's not related, but it wouldn't seem that those are necessarily related issues. So now, having said that, is Sparling, who installed the system 20 years ago, apparently works with somebody who refurbishes these units. So there potentially is a lower cost option than the 10,000 to get a refurbished unit, a refurbished 20-year-old unit, as opposed to a new unit. And now those could be different options we have going forward.
Do they warranty that at all?
I have not asked that question.
Can you see if they can get it for $53.40?
The quarterly test.
Yes.
Last year, the federal government for gas stations changed it in October to the quarterly tests were no longer sufficient. We have to do monthly. They didn't apply that to the airport.
We may be under monthly as well. I mean, we have been working under a monthly requirement. I'm reading some things that say quarterly, so I'm not really sure exactly where that stands. But we were collecting things monthly. So, any questions on where we stand on that?
So we've got a card in our back pocket if we need to play that card. But for now, you've learned how to reset it, and we'll see what the future brings.
We can limp
We
along
know it's coming.
knowing that we're not in full compliance.
You know, when it's reset, is there any concern that the calibration on the unit is,
Jeopardized?
yeah,
I don't believe so, because part of the settings is you enter the calibration data. So that is one of the things that is getting reset.
So what could be the consequence of not meeting the requirements?
If a state inspector came by, he could shut us down from a fuel dispensing, at least on that tank standpoint,
If it wasn't working.
if it wasn't working.
if you don't have your
If you
reports
don't have
on
your
file, they can
reports.
shut you down.
And Sparling is researching a price for us
I have not asked them to do that,
for
but
a
it,
refurbished unit.
Typically, they'll give you a warning the first time.
Can we look into that?
I can do that, yes.
You
Yep.
still don't have it.
Why don't we give Barry direction and to talk to Sparling, and if they know somebody that can do a refurbished unit for a lesser number, it's worth looking at. What's the estimate?
Yeah, I don't know if we need a motion, we need to
That much.
just move forward.
Okay, I will do that.
So if that doesn't work, will we lose any flights at all or not?
I would say the airline can probably most days deal with that as an issue in fuel, exclusively in Chicago. The only time that becomes an issue is when we have very full flights. Because weight issues can't take on enough fuel to do the round trip, and therefore want to fuel here. But again, since summer ended today, that's
Yeah.
not an issue really going forward.
Right,
Although-
we haven't had any flights canceled because of
Yeah.
this.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, next, on our land acquisition. So I had mentioned to the board that an auction was scheduled for Mr. Domchek on what is now airport property, the 27th of July. That occurred. And I can report that as far as I am aware, he is clear of the property around August 1st.
Sure.
Might have
Everything's
taken
gone,
a
huh?
couple extra days, but yes, yes. So we now have that property. We've owned it since we closed on it in November, but now he is clear. Still to occur is the final bookkeeping around his relocation costs as part of this. That is eligible under our grant, and I have not yet seen his invoices and things for that. We will need to pay that at some point and then get reimbursed for it. The environmental cleanup, this board has discussed in the past and is postponed indefinitely. And then one of the reasons we purchased this is to clear the trees that are becoming an navigation hazard. That will be scheduled for a future FAA grant-funded project, where we'll basically go in and clear buildings, clear everything off of that property.
So it's not critical at this time.
It's not critical as compared to other things that are on the list,
Okay.
but like anything, it at some point will become that.
Right, as the trees grow.
Yep.
Is that federal funds for the environmental cleanup?
No, those are local funds.
So we got, I can't remember how much we're looking at it.
I don't
Don't
think
know
they have
yet.
an estimate, they didn't put together an estimate yet.
The kind of high estimate without really, going into getting bids and stuff was 30,000. The expectation was probably about half.
Okay.
Any questions? So our capital improvement plan projects for the current year. So our runway rehabilitation project. As we've been talking, we have the airport scheduled to be closed from September 9th through September 18th for that project. We had a pre-bid meeting a week and a half ago with our contractor, our engineering firm, state MDOT, and at that meeting, our contractor, Reith Riley, indicated that they are currently experiencing a work stoppage due to a strike. And were basically giving us a heads up that our project might be impacted. So that's not good news, especially since we, for the whole summer, have had those flights canceled. At this point in time, uncanceling them probably doesn't make sense. Last week I had a call with the airline. They are looking at it. They actually, because of the timing of the shutdown, have now actually scheduled certain trainings to happen during that, so it may not really even be possible for them to, at this point, add those flights, or at least not all of them. So that is the ongoing issue, or potential issue. Reith Riley has now been shut down since July 31st. If that strike is resolved today, they've got projects all over the state that are now 3 weeks behind. Our project, because of the nature of it, can't really move, because again, we have to shut down the airport. We've got, after the project, a 30-day window where we then have to go back and repaint, because the asphalt needs to set for 30 days before you can put final markings on, which pushes us to the end of October. Any later than that, weather may preclude that from happening this year. So really, we can't move our dates. And if they were to resolve the issue today, then it would become, as the contractor said, it would become MDOT's decision as to which projects restart and happen on what time frame. So I've had a conversation with MDOT Aeronautics to run it up the MDOT flagpole as to where would we fit in that priority list, to see if, even if it were resolved today, if this could still happen. I shouldn't say no response, but there's not been an answer to that. But, so where this starts getting dicey is last fall during our airport inspection, it was noted that our runway markings were becoming faded and not sufficient to standard. It was requested that we repaint them last fall. We asked, because we had a runway project coming up, which we thought was going to be in the spring, and said, can we get an extension and get this work done in the spring? In the spring, when we had the opportunity for the special federal funding for the project, but that was not going to align with the timeline of happening in the spring, we asked for a second extension to this fall, and were granted it. I've reached out, and basically the answer is no further extension. Something needs to happen this fall. So what we're looking at is a requirement from the FAA that says we have to remark the runway this fall. Then potentially, if the strike continues and this project doesn't happen this year, next year when it does happen, you're gonna basically tear off that pavement, and then put down new pavement, and then remark it again. So we're looking at an incurred extra cost because of the contractor's inability potentially to perform the work on schedule. The state has indicated that because of the timing of this and the fact that we're 6 weeks from the end of the fiscal year, that this cost would be on our shoulders, that they wouldn't necessarily entertain. Now, opinions can be changed, but that was their first response, is that that would be a $50,000 added expense to the airport. So a couple things. So my safety inspector said he would be okay if the rest of the airfield, which isn't impacted by the construction, were remarked this fall. And on the runway, basically what's called a 50% marking. So you're basically updating it, but at a lower quantity of materials. And that's actually the same process that happens after paving is done. They come in and kind of do a light coat. And then after the 30 days, they come in and do a full coat. So I requested from our engineer, and I don't know where those printouts are. Don't know where they are. What a half repaving or repainting would be, and he sent me back this morning, we're talking around $27,000, $28,000 for that. So we are potentially on the hook for that amount of funds to stay compliant with our inspections.
So it's state, not feds. Am I hearing that correct?
Right now, the pushback is from state. The feds really, it's the state's responsibility to ask the feds, can we do certain things? My inspector in his response CC'd the Detroit FAA office on this, so they are aware of it. but that request has not yet come from the state. So with that, I took basically our whole set of contracts for this project to our attorney and basically asked him to review and give us some guidance on what options we have. And that is the nature of his legal opinion that I, at the beginning, asked if we could have, potentially set that as a closed session. Now that you know the details of what we're talking about, you could decide we could review that now in open session, or we could delay further discussing it until a closed session with that document in front of us.
Well, I kind of just have a
So
general question.
there's a lot of factors here. Questions, please.
Well, it looks like we're gonna have out of pocket about 75,000 at minimum, maybe there's more than I guess.
No, it should be 27.
So how about the 50,000 added?
No.
That was the original, if we were doing a full remarking,
Right.
and my inspector said we could get by with a half, and that brings that
The difference
cost down.
becomes if you have to double, if you have to do a 50% overlay, you get the additional cost, that comes out of pocket. Everything else comes under the reimbursements.
Now, theoretically, it should be possible for the state to go back to the feds and say, let's use additional of our 150,000 allocation, which we've, banked up for other projects, because the grant for the whole project was at a 0% local match. So there are funds there, it's just the timing of it is not conducive to their bureaucratic processes.
Well, I can appreciate the inspector's dilemma, but in the same aspect, there are things that are out of our control, we're trying to be fiscally responsible.
Mhm.
And we also need to have those people in those positions understand that and appreciate that, and especially in the climate we're located in. So having said that, if we need to get in touch with our state and federal elected officials, that's what we have them there for, to exercise that, because a $27,000 hit on this operation is significant.
As we all know. Now, the inspector has already given us 2 extensions, so they are aware of that, has come back with kind of an intermediate, which is this half marking. So I think they've been very accommodating. Right now, it's the state, I think, that is less accommodating, but, well, and ultimately, we have a contractor that's not following through on a contract we have with them, so.
So the guesstimate is at this point is that out of pocket is about 25,000 for these improvements in roughly.
The cost, the potential cost to us for the contractor not doing the work as scheduled is probably an additional 27,000 for this issue. Now, as I talked about, we've got the airport closed for 10 days. That hits basically already there. Assuming this doesn't happen this fall, we're now going to have another airport shutdown of 10 days sometime, hopefully in May. There are additional costs to that. I'm not at this point prepared to say what those are, but they're, not operating means you're not getting revenue in. In May, that's less important. Given what I know of this work stoppage, I'm not convinced it will be resolved by May. And if, we had a 10-day shutdown in July, that's a whole different scenario from things. And if we go out a whole nother year,
Does our contract have a completion clause?
that's what George's opinion gets into,
Okay.
what the contract language says and what our options may be.
I would imagine they have a work stoppage clause as well.
Yeah.
So why don't we hold conversation and go into closed session with that?
Never
Move
seen
on
that.
to this other
Past
items.
all their concrete companies that have that.
So airport crack sealing remarking, that is a subcomponent of this. It all ties into the above. Wildlife survey, that has been completed, and we should expect our final report to be delivered within the next 3 months, and then we're good for another 10 years. You know, we're still looking at our annual meeting with the state to really kind of look out at, you know, these capital projects, you know, for the coming years is scheduled for the first week of October. I don't remember the exact date right now. And, you know, we're planning on moving forward with that. All this stuff is kind of a hiccup in between. Air service updates. So Junie, otherwise July, ended down 24%, which is the same number we were down in June. In July, we had 16% fewer flights than the year previous, primarily because around the 4th, we did not add as many flights as previously. And also weekends in July, last year we added flights, this year we did not. That was because we didn't have sufficient demand there to basically, while we had a number of sold out flights, a flight sells out at 30 2 weeks before, that's not justification to add an additional 30 seats because, yeah, you might get 10, but running a flight that only has 10 doesn't make financial sense. Whereas a year ago, we felt confident that we could get at least 20 on those same weekends. So, you know, we're constrained by less demand, translates into less flights, which translates into overall, you know, less demand or less employment. So there's kind of a cycle there that kind of feeds upon itself. Performance, I mentioned, are very good. Fortunately, August is looking better, while still down, not the 24% that we've seen the last 2 months. As of today, with still, you know, 2 weeks left for some lagging bookings in the month, we're down 14 or 15%. So I'm thinking we'll end up about 10, maybe 11% down for August. September, because we're closed 10 days, that's a third of the month. It's, you know, not really even a valid point at this point to compare. And I brought it up last month on the board. I had some of the EAS bids that are currently coming out there. I'm still monitoring, you know, with our expected January timeframe for a new RFP for our next contract with DOT Airlines for service. Our current contract ends the end of next fiscal year, so basically 13 months from now. If you kind of work back from that, we need to start that process about the end of this year. And marketing update, so our Sky Saver 20% off promotion is still in effect through Labor Day. And, you know, we're still absorbing every time we meet, we're looking at how to react to the Traverse City pricing changes. But really it comes down to, without the ability to attract in really people that probably shouldn't be using our airport, people in Traverse City shouldn't be driving down here to fly out of here, but when the pricing made sense, you know, that was nice to have. Without that, we really need to be focusing on our target market, which is, you know, roughly Ludington to Frankfurt. And to do that effectively, we need service that offers seamless connections. And it's what the board said at the last contract renewal, and I think this even makes that more important as we look forward to going through that process.
Not only that, scheduling. I think this downturn is a direct indication of scheduling, because the plane's fantastic. It's a matter of trying to hook up.
Yep. That's my report. Any other questions?
A lot of good news in there, a lot of good news.
I know it. I know it.
I never thought of you as an eternal optimist.
With the 25% reduction in the marketing budget for next fiscal year, do you guys have a plan as to what you're reducing?
At this point, no. The budget committee met last week, so we haven't even had an opportunity to discuss
By
that.
an airport?
want the golf course, didn't want the gas station.
You guys can do something with this.
Oh, Barry, you mentioned there was a question about Ryan that came out
Oh,
earlier.
yes.
Is that part of your?
No, you want, I will talk about that to that now, so.
Well, let me ask, in new business, approval of NDOT contracts, has that already been, that's all?
Let's
No,
see,
that's,
closed session.
no, there is, as part of your packet,
Okay.
a contract that needs to be approved today.
That hasn't already been approved?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So let's go to Ryan's.
Yeah. So after our last board meeting where Mr. Shively talked to the board, per the board's direction, I reached out to him and basically asked him to come back with a proposal of what he was thinking. Attached here are a few documents. So the first is his first email response, which had attached to it a few documents with some quotes he's been given for ways of repairing the door, which is ultimately needed to make that a usable hanger. Then he followed up a day or so later with another email that basically says, he basically says maybe he should just purchase the hanger and do a land lease like we do with other tenants. And then the last document is something he sent to me that basically talks through some of the legal issues and some of the requirements around airports and leasing hangars and selling assets at market, below market, etc. So there's a lot of information here to digest, and quite frankly, with everything else that's been going on, this has not been the highest priority for me, so I've kind of been leaving him hanging on this. But basically, you'll see is that in his original write-up, he was thinking of around a 20-year lease, and basically thinking, you know, that we wouldn't charge any rent for 20 years while he was making improvements that are based on the, you know, quotes on the order of $20,000. That's just for the door, let alone some of the other issues. I think based on that second email, he's probably thinking now more like the ground leases that we've done for hangars, we have two currently in effect. One for a hangar that's currently owned by Orchard Beach Aviation and another for a hangar that's currently owned by Ted Ahrens. The terms of both of those were 40 years. So I'm thinking he's maybe thinking something along that time frame, so that he can basically invest in an asset and that there might still be enough life in it that he could, if needed, to sell it, and there would still be a reasonable price, because the way these land lease agreements work is essentially you agree to pay the airport a lease for the land that you're using for a period of time, 20, 40 years is not atypical. And then you're basically allowed to build a building, do whatever you're doing with that. Obviously it needs to be airport related, and there are stipulations around that. And then at the end of that lease, you either return that property to how it was when you took it over, or you basically are turning over that building to be owned by the airport. So I think he's thinking that a longer period of time would allow him time to recoup his investment, and we would still, as an airport, end up with a new tenant at our airport in the interim, and have a long-term, either it ends up being a vacant parcel, in which case an existing unusable asset, an eyesore, is gone at the end of this, or we get turned over a, you know, working hangar that can be used for some subsequent use. So that's kind of how that process works in a nutshell. You know,
Is it, are those, you know, if, let's say he proposes a 40-year, or we talk about a 40-year, and he's 25 years in, he's done flying, he has the right to sublease it? Is that typically?
Or to sell it, it
sell the
is
balance?
generally transferable, yes.
So you're selling
I
the
think
balance of,
obviously it's, you know, whatever language put in there, but I think it is transferable with authority approval, but.
so the outcome at the end is the airport gets the asset, typically.
Or it's torn down and they generally, why would someone tear down a perfectly good building at
Right.
their cost when they could just walk away from it? Now-
This is the part that 40 years from now, the people sitting in this room will go, what were they thinking? Or they were geniuses.
I don't know, let's not go that far.
So as he says
So,
here, his
let's-
goal is to eventually do flight instruction, to do airplane rides in his World War II trainer. Those things would be a benefit because both of those things are not things that are currently happening here that could attract more activity at the airport. And, you know, from a personal, you know, situation with Orchard Beach offering airplane rides, that's a completely different experience. I think, you know, having that competition would actually help, you know, other airplane rides here because, you know, you want to spend a lot of money flying in something that's, you know, really special, or do you just want to do something a lot less expensive? You know, I think it would actually be beneficial to both of us. So I don't see that as being, you know, at all of a concern. I think it'd be good all around.
Andrew, are you aware of what's the behind the scenes of this? I know you just like, so Ryan was a Manistee resident, he was an active renter here. He transferred through PCA, transferred to California. When he was out- Washington. Acquired this World War II trainer. Transferred back because his children were going to school here and is planning on being here for that period of time. Flew the plane back, doesn't fit in any building we got here, other than the additional side of Barry's. And
Or
the-
Ted Aaron's, it would
For
fit in there too.
So
Those are the only
at
two
the-
hangars.
At the rent structure that they need to achieve, he is looking at other options, so he's proposing a rebuild or repair of our box hangar that's falling apart. So we would essentially have an eyesore repaired, have a functioning small business, kind of meet some of the criteria that we've talked about, and it's private investment money versus the airport, which we don't have any money to fix that. And 2 years ago, was it, we talked about going to the county for a loan of $100,000 to refurbish that, to make it usable by the airline, and which that went by the wayside, so.
How old is the existing hangar?
Probably 50, 60 years old.
Yeah.
American Box Board goes back 60 years.
It's ironic that he actually now works for the company that originally built that hangar. And actually, I think if he were to restore it, he probably would tie some of that history in, because I think he feels that's kind of a special tie.
I did speak to Andy at PCA about, would they consider refurbishing it for the airport, and mentioned the possible dollar amount, and it didn't go very far. Always sending me for a cup of coffee out here to look at the building.
That's a start.
It's a start.
Is that a reasonable return, 40 years or 20 years makes sense too, or?
I'm not sure, I'd have to read this article he's presented. Ted was 40,
Yes.
and how much longer is your lease?
Around 10 years, I think.
Another 10?
Do you recall what we're getting in land lease payments from those? It's around $1,000 a year, isn't it?
Well, and it's increased.
I mean, yes.
But yeah, it's probably right
This is
around there.
probably a little bit smaller footprint, so.
So on one
We are
hand,
talking that, you know, if we're following through on what we do for other tenants leasing in the same thing, it's probably $1,000 a year of revenue,
1,000 a year?
yes.
That's what they pay to lease, is that what you said?
To lease the ground that
Their building
their
sits on.
building sits on,
Each or total? Each tenant, $1,000 a year?
yeah, so Ted Aaron's pays, it's slightly more than that, and Orchard Beach Aviation pays slightly more than 1,000.
It's pretty common practice, so Ted says to the airport, however long ago, look, I just wanna lease that bit of land, I'll put the building on, when this thing's over, it's your building.
Hmm.
Which, if we get that building, it's a very functional, modern building. So on one hand, we do nothing, he can't afford to stay here, and we have a building that's, continues to fall apart. One option we discussed last week, or last month, was we receive no income for a period of time he fixes the building up. When that time frame is over, he continues to rent from us. So again, no revenue. In the scenario he's leaning towards, he's gonna fix the building up, we get the building back, or somebody down the road, the airport does, yet we receive revenue.
And part of this.
It's not huge revenue, but that's our decision to what we, you know, if you wanna factor inflation, is $1,000 the right number, or should, I don't know how high he'd go and what should.
Actually, there is an inflation factor in the calculation.
Every 5 years, it's reviewed with the consumer price index.
Okay.
And part of the conversation last month that I think we were all kind of trying to get our heads around was, if we are just leasing it to him, the building as it is, and not charging him rent, and he's making improvements, we're still the owner, so what oversight, what liability issues, there were all sorts of how would that work scenarios. Selling it to him, that makes it much clearer that it's now his responsibility, and at the end of this, we either say, no, tear it down and take it away, or we like what you've done, and we can kind of make that decision at that time. So in some ways, it's a cleaner, but it, potentially is, over time, potentially less lucrative for us, maybe, depending on how that all would work.
So Mr. Aaron's, he's got a 40-year title on that, is it, right, or? I thought I heard 40 years, he has it tied up for 40 years, doesn't he, or not? For
his building, yes, and I don't know, there's probably 15 years left on that, I don't know.
Yeah, but he's been trying to, I thought he was trying to sell that too, wasn't
He's not actively currently trying to sell, although
He wasn't
ironically,
on
there
the
is an agenda item later that talks about some things that he's looking to do.
I guess my concern would be going out that far, because at 30 years, the building's fully depreciated. So I could see maybe 20 years,
That's what I was thinking.
but going out 40 years, that's why I was asking you how old the existing one is, because even when it finally does end, and Doug's the only one still sitting here, you're gonna get back a fully depreciated building that either needs to be torn down or replaced anyway.
The nature of these buildings, though, is they're all steel, they're meant to have long lives. But, yes, it is not going to be worth a whole lot at that point in time.
I agree.
So at 20 years, at $400 a month for rent, he would be looking at around 96,000 if he were to find rent in that price point, but that's substantially less than what your hangar size rents for, isn't it?
Not substantially, but yes, it is less.
So for an investment of 20 or 30,000 to fix the building up, and another 12 or 20,000, if we get $1,000 a year for 20 years, he's saving 50% of his potential. We fix a building up that looks like it doesn't belong here, or he fixes it. I don't know that he'd go for 20 years, but we could always.
So, I mean, I'm hearing a couple things that would say, you know, keep the term as short as reasonable. Overall, I'm not hearing a lot of things that say this is a bad idea. I guess I would recommend maybe the board either assign this to one of the existing committees to further either negotiate or, you know, direct me, I mean, however you want to proceed, but I'm not sure that it makes sense to spend more time at the board level working
With
through
the
fine
existing
details.
ones that you have, did the airport board retain some sort of like homeowners association so that there's certain guidelines as to what they can do and what they can't do? So it doesn't, all of a sudden you have somebody painting the side of the hangar with some crude stuff?
There are a couple
Sorry,
things,
industry.
yes,
Big pink one out.
there's a document called Airport Rules and Regulations that applies to everything that happens here, that addresses some of that. The agreements themselves touch on other things, so yes, there are multiple
For example, when
documents.
Ted tried to sell his hangar a year ago or 2 years ago, he had this big huge sign on the side that said hangar for sale or for sale.
Yeah.
Didn't look real good. We approached him and said,
Looked like you were going out of business.
yeah,
Right.
you can't do that. So we can go back to the capital projects committee?
Right, I would say yes, let's do that, because it's gonna take some while to think about this stuff.
And I recall earlier that you were planning a meeting anyway, so.
Yes.
Barry, I'm just curious, at other airports, is that the same kind of arrangement, 40 years versus 20 years, or is it all over the place, or what?
It's all over the place. I mean, I'll take an example. So Traverse City Costco, exact situation. They are leasing that land, paying the airport a pretty hefty, you know, annual payment. And I think that is either 40 or 50 years.
Oh,
So I would think a new construction, venture longer, restore, shorter.
And you could also tag the end of it, that if at 20 years he wants to remain a tenant, instead of it, so it reverts back to our ownership, but factor a reduced rental agreement in there at that point. So whatever the going T-hanger rental rate is on a monthly basis, he can pay 75 or 50% more than that, or something, so it still remains a deal.
If it's working out for him, where it's
Yeah.
still advantageous for him to stay.
Yeah,
Right.
because it's gonna be exactly what he wants. He's got 20 years to make it what he wants. Or he'll get to 19 years and start pulling some things out of it, so we have a shell left that's at least decent, and somebody else could rent it.
I like what he's looking at doing too, bring some other activities into it, so.
Right.
I think
But
it's
I wouldn't go
worth
beyond
pursuing.
20 years.
Yeah,
That's where I'm at.
seems,
I think you also have the opportunity to look at, like you said, one might lead to two, might lead to three. So if we have a nice building there and they find out, hey, this is the private investment that we got, maybe somebody else is looking to put some private investment money.
Okay.
Okay,
so what committees are going to?
so this was part of the airport
Capital, okay.
director's report, right, Barry?
Yes.
So now we're on to new business.
So, new business item A, which is in your packet appendix C. So, this board in previous meetings has approved our contract with Rafe Riley. This is actually the payment mechanism for all of that. This is our agreement with the state for funding this project under the state block grant program. And actually, I just got an email this morning that the FAA piece of this has been approved. So even though we've known that the funding was in place, we actually now have the paperwork. But this basically makes the state essentially work on our behalf to basically do all of the money around this project. So every project we do, we have one of these agreements. So that is why we need to execute it, because actually until this is done, we really can't even, you really shouldn't be approaching the state and saying, we need you to do things to address our other issues, because this is what basically says they should be helping us.
Does this,
When do you need to get this approved?
Today,
Well, today?
does the contract have a term, or, because it sounds like you're not too optimistic as to when we're just gonna do this, so is this contract just open-ended, or?
it is open-ended for the project, so, and, you know, those can be 3 years or more, depending on how things proceed.
This is, we need to approve this as a, lost the word.
The contract, or?
No, this is
Just
just
a
a,
procedural thing.
yeah, this is a procedural
Yeah,
thing,
this
right?
is, yes. This board has, you know, approved generally 1 or 2 of these a year. This is a standard boilerplate agreement for a project with MDOT.
That's a little, I'm not sure why they have a federal award date, 7/24/17, and then they have it open /2020. Same with grant award dates. On attachment X.
What, this is G, right?
It's, I think you're on attachment X, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, attachment X, page
Oh,
C11,
back.
maybe.
It's not the contract, but it's the attachment to it. I take it?
Mm-hmm.
Just, they got some dates in there, I just wasn't sure why it's left blank either. If that'll be the expectation we finish by something 2020.
I cannot answer that.
Okay.
But, you know, down on line 13, you know, anticipated end is the end of next calendar year. So, I mean, these are meant to be long.
December of 2020,
Large windows.
Right.
2020.
Oh, actually, I think I can answer part of that is, so there are 2 funding sources for this. Part of this is this special federal grant program that has 0% match. I believe that is the date that is not filled in, because, again, I mentioned this, but we just got, you know, documentation signed by the FAA, so that date now is known, but wasn't when this was drafted. And then the other is basically some of our annual funding that's basically paying for the remarking, what's incorporated in the project. And that grant would have been as of fiscal year, you know, a few fiscal years ago. So I think that's why there are 2 dates, is because they're coming from 2 sources of federal funding.
Number 8 kind of describes them, maybe the first part's the first date, and then the second part's the second date.
Those are the 2 pieces of the project, yes.
You said if this Reef Riley thing goes on, it might be even next summer, so I mean, or next fall, pushing us to the deadline date.
I,
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, that's a what if, that's the worst case scenario.
yes.
But do we have to make a motion for approval for signature?
Yes.
Is it worth going back to them and bringing that concern up, Barry? Or is it gonna not change anything?
It's not gonna change anything. As George had, when we've had George review these, he says there are lots of things in them that he would like changed, but they are boilerplate that
Every
this is-
lawyer says that.
this is what you get when dealing with the government,
Exactly.
so.
All right. So we need a motion to approve the funding source documentation.
I would just use the language that's on the agreement, so approve the agreement between the airport and Michigan Department of Transportation for the rehabilitation and remarking airport project under the state block grant program.
So moved.
And to
You get all that?
authorize the chair to sign any documents.
Now, would this document still be valid if, for whatever reason, Wraith Router never does come through and they completely go on strike and go into bankruptcy? And you have to go through the bidding process again, and the prices are gonna be higher, then we're gonna have to, this is no longer valid then, right?
I defer answering that until reviewing George's.
If there's not somebody you're contracted with any longer, it's gonna go kaput, so I'm not gonna worry about such things.
Is this a 90% federal grant or 95% or what is this?
The majority of it is 100%.
Right.
Right, it's
The
pretty up there.
small piece is at the 95%.
Okay, all right, so,
Do we have
Nice little
a
piece of
second
money
to
there.
that motion?
No, we didn't.
I'll second it then.
Roll call, or, yeah, roll call.
Mr. Bergstrom,
yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hawes,
Yes,
Mr. Dunn,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman.
Yes.
Okay, the next item under new business is a request from Mr. Aaron's regarding hangars. We've been talking about him in different contexts.
now he wants the ball.
So, Doug mentioned it earlier, the airline has been looking for a place to house their aircraft in the winter. We now have, a year ago, the intention was that Public Charters was going to have in service a Beech 1900 aircraft. That did not happen a year ago, and instead we had the jet operate all winter on a reduced frequency and with a suboptimal schedule. The Beech 1900 aircraft is now in place and ready to begin operations next month. However, Ultimate Jet, who is the operator, has said they will not operate out of this airport unless they have access to hangar space to do basic maintenance. We don't have the airport a hangar big enough for that aircraft. Thus, the conversations a few years ago around spending $100,000+ to renovate and expand the hangar we were just talking about with Mr. Shively. With this particular aircraft, and knowing its dimensions, Ted Aaron's hangar is a candidate for basically fitting that aircraft, or fitting most of the aircraft. The tail won't fit, but the wings will barely, about a foot to spare on each side. So Public Charters has reached out to Mr. Aaron's about leasing his hangar for the winter months so that they have a place to do basic maintenance. And part of that discussion was that Public Charters would install, like, I'll call it a curtain. So you can kind of basically pull a curtain shut and kind of put it around, so you're basically preventing wind and stuff from blowing in, even though the tail would be staying outside the hangar. You look around and you Google and it's like, that's a thing, who knew? And from what I understand, in two calls I've had with Mr. Aarons on this, is that they've agreed to terms as to what he would rent to them for. He then approached me and asked, he has personal equipment and stuff in his hangar, and he was wondering if there was other space on the airport that he could relocate his stuff to, so that he could accommodate the airline's request to provide the space to them. since right now, the airline only needs it for the winter months, and the future of what happens in subsequent winters, will they be the same airline or not? You know, that's undetermined, but at this point, we do know that we're under contract for another 13 months. We don't know about 2 winters from now. So Ted reached out to me and said he doesn't want to move his stuff back and forth multiple times. So he is requesting that he utilize one of our empty T hangars and basically relocate his stuff for a year, and that we would not charge him rent on that. He's looking at it as a vacant space anyway. He's doing the airport a favor by accommodating the airline. But he would agree that since the airline is only needing his hangar in the winter months, that the airport could rent out his hangar in the summer months when the airline doesn't need it, and he'd be willing to split any of that revenue 50-50, so that there is a potential revenue for the airport, not much, but he's doing the airport a service by accommodating our airline. And I said, so we had a call on the phone. He asked me to put it into writing my understanding, which is what my email is to him, and then his response that basically summarized our conversation accurately. And I said I would bring it to the board.
Barry, what kind of stuff is it he needs stored?
He's got a trailer in there, a boat,
Okay, so
personal belongings.
he doesn't need a really secured,
No.
just as long as it's a roof over it or something like that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
We don't get in trouble with the FAA by renting one of our hangars, which is supposed to be used for aircraft, to him.
I would say no under the circumstances, because, you know, I think there's a logical explanation as to why
Yeah.
and this is being done.
And then you had when you and I discussed this, you had an idea of figuring out a way to charge public charters, potentially for the lost rent.
And ultimately, since we are doing this for the airline, you know, we could basically say, yes, Ted, we'll offer this to you. Public charters, we don't want to be out that rent, we're going to charge it to you instead.
That seems reasonable.
How many empty hangars do we have out there?
6,
And they've been empty for a long time.
yes.
Sounds reasonable.
I think it sounds reasonable, and I think it sounds reasonable even if you can't figure out a way to get public charge to pay for it, but even if you get public charge to pay a reduced fee, we're up.
I don't know how the feds would have a problem, because we're not using those hangars really, are we, anyway, or some of them, or?
There's a policy or a guideline
Yes.
that indicates that if we're in the business of being an airport, we cannot rent that to you. If you had a boat and you just called Barry one day and said, will you rent me that space because there's no other storage units in town?
But we're not renting.
Yeah, we can't do that because of the federal dollars involved.
But if we don't get compensation, we just leave it in there, it's okay?
Like Nick, you
Again,
said, there's a story to be told here.
There,
Yeah.
and
But this is
the
a transfer from
document
one
that
building to the other.
Ryan Shively, the last thing, that actually talks about this very issue. And basically, the distinction is between non-aeronautical uses and aeronautical uses. We would want to basically portray this as an aeronautical use because we're accommodating through this chain of agreements
Sure.
a need for the airline.
Do you feel we need board action on this?
How about
I don't-
further research?
I don't think we need a decision today, you know, but I would, you know, like enough direction so that I can get back to Ted and basically tell him where we stand, and if you want me to be negotiating with public charters on this in some aspect. We need something wrapped up before the snow flies,
That's what I
but
would
we've got a
say.
little time.
I would give you direction to research with public charters, what kind of fee you can get from them, if any. But I don't see in the next 6 months, I don't see 6
and actually 7 hangars being rented, so I think we're good.
Well, the other thing is, that maybe
Maybe the one with the
we've got
worst
one that's
doors.
not suitable for a plane too, yeah, maybe it's leaks, it's got birds dropping, could be a lot of things,
Well,
really.
there's probably several out there, that's why we're trying to get some new doors and stuff out there, because
Oh, yeah, to improve
doors
it,
are
yeah,
not
yeah,
very
yeah. Get
Do
some,
we have any idea
User-friendly.
what public charters agreed to pay him?
I do not know,
Just wondering how
and
that
it's not,
compares to what our rent structure is.
when I was asked my opinion, I said I felt that $1,000 a month would be reasonable for renting that hangar. I don't know where they came up.
That's the nice thing, you know, if he's 10 years from being done with that lease, is that what you said, about 10 years?
I wanna say 15 for his,
So this facility gets that building back in 10 or 15 years, and is now, he's got the largest
it's the largest hangar we have on.
we've got on property, so it becomes an asset. So that's when we can say, those people were smart back then. We won't be in this room more than likely, and somebody can say that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's bed, okay. Coho Bend,
So did we take any action on that?
Closed
no,
session.
we just gave him direction to research it
Pursue
more.
it, okay.
The
Okay.
next item would be the closed session.
For all these items?
No, that, where we added it on
We
the
added
agenda
C.
Added
was
item
C.
Oh, under new business, I
Under new
put under
business.
old, I'm sorry, okay, so, motion to go into closed session?
You would want your motion to include who you're allowing to stay into, just FYI.
So yeah, there are some requirements around that that recently had refreshed in my mind. You need a 2/3 roll call vote to go into closed session. You need to identify who, in addition to the board, you want to attend. And you should reference the section of the Open Meetings Act that allows for that topic to be discussed under closed session. I had intended to, before this meeting, find the paragraph reference, I didn't. But the general section talks about basically client attorney privilege data. And George's memo says that this is client attorney privilege data that's not subject to the FOIA, whatever that acronym stands for.
Now that Rachel left, do we need to do that?
Yes, because there are 3 of us on this end of the table that are not members of the board.
And
And a
I have to
camera.
leave. I have a 2:00 appointment I have to get to. I apologize.
And your camera needs to be shut
Yes, yes.
down. I wanna talk to you a second.
So, do we have someone making that motion? And
I'm gonna attempt it. I make a motion that we enter into a, private.
closed session,
Closed session of the, for contract discussions.
not contract discussions. Reviewing the legal opinion of our attorney.
You get that?
In a second.
She can.
Okay.
And the names of the people that are going to stay.
You gotta vote
Points.
And the folks that will stay for that,
yes. In addition to the board.
in addition to the board, would be Barry Peterson, or Barry,
Well, let's ask him to do it.
Susan Zelinski, and Julie Schmidt.
No, we need someone keeping the closed session
And
minutes,
I'm
which is a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
that,
You're doing a
Julie,
good
that's
job,
a
actually.
separate.
You're doing a good
And
job.
I'm referencing the Open Meetings Act portion that allows this to take place.
The legal vehicle stuff.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
And that needs to be a roll call vote.
To go in and out.
Mr. Downs,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom. Mr. Gentili.
Yes.
Closed
I'll
session.
be right back.
Item 10 on the agenda, old business.
So, Coho Bend billboard contract, since I've had lots of time with George the last week. There actually is an update for the first time in months.
Oh, really?
Months, years,
Rachel's gonna
years.
wanna hear this, that she's gone.
So he met with Mr. St. Dennis and discussed the issue. There had been some conversation that Mr. St. Dennis was selling the property and then he wasn't.
Land contract.
It is a land contract, so a sale is proceeding in that. What Mr. St. Dennis, since he's also an attorney, responded to George with is a set of case law that he believes gives him certain responsibilities. George is basically going to review that and then basically either get back to us or back to Mr. St. Dennis. So we don't have resolution. One thing though George did mention to me is that Mr. St. Dennis does want what's best for, you know, the community to come out of this, so he seems amiable to work with us on some resolution, but yet he's not willing at this point to just accept what we believe our terms are. So that is the update there.
Well, it's gonna cost us more with George's fees than it is for what we're gonna collect from the sign.
The rest of the community, is they don't care, they drive by that sign and don't look at it.
Yeah, really.
I have a question though. You said you want to discuss the issue and every time I've been here, he always says there's nothing to update. Can I just have a little background as to,
So,
Oh,
so maybe this might make sense?
okay, so on the corner of River Road and 31,
Mhm.
there's a billboard for Coho Bend, which Mr. St. Dennis owns and is land contracting to sell now. That billboard was there when the airport purchased that property.
Okay.
Unlike our other billboards, which we are under contract and receiving money for leasing our property to have the billboard, we do not have an agreement on that particular billboard. We reached out to him probably 5 years ago, and his response was, well, this billboard has been there for so many years that due to essentially squatters' rights, there's a legal term for that. I have now the right to continue doing that. George believes because we are a government entity, those conditions don't apply. Mr. St. Dennis in this conversation is bringing up legal precedents that contradict what George believes. So that is where that all stands.
Gotcha.
Is that an eminent domain situation or not?
That's the opposite when government takes private property as opposed to when.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
it isn't the thing behind all of this, that there's a federal rule that we have to have income from that sign since it's on our property. We can't give it free.
Again, per the other conversation, that is a non-aeronautical use of airport resources. We should be getting fair market value for it,
Right.
which is more than zero. So, that's the whole story there. On airport zoning, the next item of the business. So, a bit of an update. Manistee Township is starting the process of updating their township master plan. They are contracting with the county zoning, what's that department called? Planning department, for that, to do that work. And Jeff reached out to Rob Carson to confirm that they were working on it, and Rob's response is that as part of that process, he intends to bring in our zoning issues so that the township has it in their master plan, and then it will flow through to their zoning and other things. So basically, Rob is aware of it, and he now has a means to actually follow through this process. One of the things I still want to reach out to Rob, or at least attend the public hearings on this master plan, is I want to make sure that as it relates to our strategic plan and kind of the airport as an economic development driver, that the township's master plan really aligns with our goals, and that they're together. So So that is my update on that. Having said that, I don't really see that we need to continue having that under old business, since I think there is a path in place for it to be resolved. So I don't think we need to continue tracking that specific item. Coho Bends probably do a little bit yet.
Okay.
You're probably keeping in contact with Rob though, as he moves along and assisting with their zoning.
Yes, yes.
Comments by authority members? David, good to go?
Could we get a better copy of that sometime or another?
There's a column off it.
The budget?
I think there's a column off too.
Oh,
You need another page.
they were off over here.
We need this much more.
Apparently it was on an 8.5 by 11 sheet and shrunk down or something.
Yes, it was
For
a,
whatever reason, it's a program, all of our budgets print out in this fine, it's not easy.
I think there's a
To
few
the eye.
letters that are taken, like they're
Chopped off.
faded off of the end of it, so.
It's just,
Yeah,
it's, even our budgets, when we get them, if you condense it down, it really gets hard to read.
Agreed.
Can you
Maybe
print out the new
put it
one?
on-
If it was on legal, it'd be easier.
Well, maybe we get a copy of the legal then.
We'll get it to you. Is it, we'll just either email it or mail it.
Well, if you go through email, I'm saying probably print it out, so mail it.
Gotcha.
Plenty of talking today, so, nothing more.
Andrew.
In the beginning, you had mentioned trying to get the executive committee together to talk about the budgets, or talk about contracts. Then you talked about the capital committee getting together. So I'm on the capital, I'm not on the budget, so
Yep.
Correct.
are they two different meetings, or are you trying to
Yeah,
combine them
no,
all in
that'd
one?
be two different meetings. I will reach out, to those committee members and try to do something, let's figure it out. My
Well,
My
we've
next
already had
month
some
is very
budget meetings.
difficult, but we'll figure it out. So I'll send an email and put it all together.
Because we were in closed session, does Barry have to collect the memo?
Yeah, he should have the letter.
Can I keep it or no?
Well, we can't, you
Are
can't.
you talking about the Michael
Just for
Myers?
minutes
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
So I have, my comment is, next month's, meeting is on the 16th. And, well, that's the Kaiser one, that's the one that's. There is a high likelihood that I can't make that meeting on the 16th. It's not affirmative yet, but I've got about 4 different requests that I'm being pulled at from my current owner. So I don't know if you just go on without me, or you want, if it's possible to slide that further in that week.
Why don't we change the date?
How's that?
I guess I would say is, given that those two committee meetings have a lot of things to discuss, and you are on both those committees, I think it would make sense to accommodate your schedule if we
I'm real flexible.
So this would be a committee meeting?
No,
You
this
want
is
to
the next,
change it?
this
You
is the
want
next
board-
board meeting
next board,
scheduled for
okay.
Monday the 16th. If
Right,
it could move to potentially Thursday the 19th, that'd be ideal.
We have our regional summit that day.
Oh, yeah, that's a major
Oh, you
conflict.
would miss that one.
Wednesday.
What about the following Monday? Just keeping it.
Mondays are brutal, every Monday I'm screwed in September.
How about the following week? Just do that, you know?
Well, he says
Does
Monday.
Does the 13th work at all?
Friday the 13th, potentially, yeah. That's a few days early.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good for me, it's good for everybody here. And Karen's the only one missing.
Schedule change.
yeah.
What time?
What time?
Same at noon?
If noon is good, has Karen got something, there's just.
She's usually good on Fridays, as a rule.
So is there a better time on Friday?
So if you wanna do it later today, if that makes life easier for you, that's
Or
fine with
earlier.
me. Well, just don't interfere with my fish fry.
Well, then we'll make it earlier. How about 10
How
o'clock?
about 10 o'clock Friday?
Friday the 13th, 10 a.m.
Okay, 13,
Thank you, everybody.
10 a.m.
That's all I have. I thank you for hanging in with us. This is a marathon meeting.
Well, it's not easy with your travels and all that stuff, but thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you. So Friday, September, that's going to 13.
Barry, how well used is this office right here, this room?
A few times a week. The CDB holds their board meetings here.
I'm thinking about having an economic development board meetings here, I think that might be a good location for that.
Show off with their board meeting. It's kind of centrally located for if you've got people that are, outside of the city attending, so.
I mentioned this to Barry driving up. Did anybody hear the non-good news about Grand Haven's airport over the weekend?
No.
A skydiver died.
Oh, I saw it this morning.
It didn't open or what?
He, from all the reports, they had a skydiving festival, so there's a business there, Grand Haven Skydive, or Skydive Grand Haven, and they do tandem jumps all the time. Busy business. Very well thought of in the community since it's been there for 2 years, and they had what would be like an airport fly-in. They had people from all over the country and Canada came in this weekend for a massive jump festival, and they brought in 2 additional aircraft that could 20 people could jump at a time from 14,000 feet, and they were everywhere. And upon landing, a 33-year-old man tried to avoid a collision right before touchdown. They all tried to land at the same spot, and they said he made an aggressive maneuver to miss somebody else, and when he did that, he lost all lift in his chute. He was about 20 feet in the air. And he died. Probably doing about 40 miles an hour when he did.
What about that air show up in Gateway?
We are, I'm sorry.